Oh, am I on? Hi. Today we're going to be talking about evolution. So if you don't have your notes packet, grab that out and let's continue on with our idea of change over time. How did we get here? Let's check it out.
Ah! Nice, ape. Easy. Oh, for the... Dear Tim and Moby, did humans really come from monkeys? From Franz. Not exactly. Humans and apes belong to an order of mammals called primates. They share a common ancestor from millions of years ago. This animal probably looked something like a cross between a human and an ape. Well, the fossil evidence is incomplete. Scientists don't know exactly where the common ancestor fits in. But they're pretty certain that, through the process of evolution, humans and apes split off into separate species from that ancestor. Evolution is the process by which life forms change over a number of generations. Yeah, it's called the theory of evolution, but in science, a theory is far more than just a guess. It's an idea that's been repeatedly confirmed by experimentation and hard evidence. Paleontologists, scientists who study fossils, have assembled a pretty convincing story to explain how humans came to exist on Earth. Based on evidence from the fossil record, they think that the first hominins split off from early apes between 6 and 8 million years ago. Hominins are a group of primates that include humans and pre-human ancestors. The oldest found hominin appears to be Sahelanthropus chadensis. It lived 6 to 7 million years ago, and like all of our early ancestors, it called Africa home. Only an incomplete skull has been found, but it has enough in common with later hominins for scientists to be pretty certain it's a human ancestor. Bone fossils of hominins that lived during the following 3 or 4 million years are often of Australopithecine hominins. The several known species of Australopithecines had more human traits, like bigger brains. Many of them were bipedal, too. That means they walked upright. The Australopithecines' larger brains would have made them smarter, helping them hunt and survive. That's how evolution works. Animals with advantageous traits survive long enough to breed and pass those traits on. Those with bad traits don't.
You'd think having a giant brain would be a good thing, but my head's too big. I can't move.
About 2.5 million years ago, various species of Homo hominins began to appear. Homo habilis is the oldest hominin we've found that made stone tools. Homo habilis beings had much larger brains, smaller teeth, and flatter faces than earlier hominins. They just looked more human. But, as far as paleontologists know, Homo habilis was not a direct ancestor of Homo sapiens, modern humans. It seems to have gone extinct about 1.5 million years ago. If you look at the history of hominins, you can see a lot of dead ends like that. But the ancestors of Homo sapiens were better adapted than any of the other hominin species. We can trace our roots from Homo rudolfensis to Homo ergaster, to Homo heidelbergensis, to Homo sapiens. That's us. Each of our ancestors slowly developed more and more human characteristics, increasing brain size, taller bodies, the use of fire, and even forming primitive societies. Very funny, Moby. Oh boy. Huh. Huh.
Well, now that we know where we came from, let's make sure you have your note packet and we'll look at an activity that you guys can tackle on Schoology. So let's start with biodiversity. Have you ever noticed so many things in the world look so different, but yet so similar? All insects have some similar characteristics: number of legs, body segments, eyes, antenna. Owls and you share 2 eyes and a nose-like thing and 2 feet, and so many things are similar, but yet so very different. How can things be so similar and yet so different? Well, those are the kind of questions that certain explorers and scientists were trying to answer back when the idea of evolution was proposed. When we say biodiversity, we mean life differences, different types of life. Where did it all come from? And what does it share in common? Well, speaking of biodiversity, you're very different than a banana, but you share about 50% of the genetic material. Same DNA, about 50%. And about 99.9% similar DNA as a chimpanzee. Well, does it mean you came directly from chimpanzees or from bananas? Well, maybe not, but you have something similar in common. All right, folks, if you haven't gotten your definitions down, here's evolution, a change in the inherited traits of a population. So we're not talking about an individual, but a whole group, from one generation to the next, which could lead to from one to the next. Again, inherited traits, remember, are things that we talked about in the last unit, genes and traits. Populations of organisms change over time. That's what evolution is. And we talk about things like humans being related to some of these different mammals, which are related to some of these other animals with backbones, which are related to some of these other things that had cells. It just depends which way the tree branched off, and 90% of these things are no longer here, are extinct. But the ones that are still here, we assume will continue to change and evolve over time. So what do we mean by a species? We talk about species evolving, or a living thing. We're talking about a group of organisms that share so many common traits that they reproduce, and their offspring is able to reproduce as well. Fertile offspring can reproduce as well. So we're not
Dear
talking about
Tim and
hybrids like horses and donkeys.
Who was Charles
mules.
Darwin?
We're talking
Yours
about
very
new species
sincerely,
that actually
Helen.
are so different that they wouldn't be able to
Charles
breed
Darwin was a
anymore
British
with anything
naturalist who
else.
developed the
Like
modern theory of evolution in
humans
the
are
19th
called
century.
Homo sapien.
After early
We have
training
our
in medicine
species
and
name,
theology,
sapien,
Darwin
and
studied
this is our
nature,
genus.
learning about
Genus
anatomy,
and species
geology,
together
and classification.
give us our scientific
All that study
name.
paid off when he signed on for a job on the HMS Beagle. The Beagle sailed to South America in 1831 to
the
map
idea
the
of
continent's
evolution
coastline.
has been thought
The
about
voyage
for quite a
lasted
while,
5
but
years,
was most
during
clearly
which
written
Darwin
down by
collected and
Charles
studied
Darwin
hundreds of species of
after
plants and
coming back
animals.
from his journey
His most famous
by
work
boat
was done in the
around the
Galapagos
world,
Islands
where
off
he
the coast of
observed
Ecuador.
many things, many pieces
Darwin
of
was interested in why
biodiversity, lots of
mockingbirds were
species,
different from island to
and wondered
island.
how did they all have
Each
similar
bird had a
traits,
beak that
but
was
yet
well suited
so
for the
different?
type of food
How did
available
that
on its
theory
home
of
island.
evolution by natural selection
Later, he
occur?
found that tortoises
And the idea
and
of a
finches
species
differed
we
among
just
the
talked
islands
about.
too.
So let's check it out.
Darwin came to believe that all the finch species must have evolved or changed over time from a common ancestor. He thought that these changes would require a very long time to happen. No, he wasn't the first scientist to think that life forms change from generation to generation. Before he formed his own ideas, Darwin agreed with Jean-Baptiste Lamarck's theory of evolution. Now, according to Lamarck, animals that use a certain body part a lot will develop great strength or size in that part. He believed that these changes would then be passed on to the next generation. Darwin didn't quite see it like that. He believed animals couldn't pass on traits they developed during their own lifetimes. We'll think of it this way. If two, say, bodybuilders have a baby, it won't be born any more muscular than average. According to Darwin, animals have to struggle for resources, like food and land. Their ultimate goal is to live long enough to reproduce. Animals born with advantageous traits are just likelier to live long enough to reach that goal. Those traits will then be passed on to their offspring. Animals with disadvantageous traits are less likely to survive and have kids. so those traits are less likely to get passed on. Well, it's not a very nice system. Darwin called the process natural selection. He said that tiny changes, accumulating over hundreds of thousands of years, would lead to the kind of variations he observed in the Galapagos mockingbirds. In 1859, Darwin published his findings in a book, On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection. Many people opposed the theory of evolution because it seemed to conflict with their religious beliefs. Oh, no, Darwin never said that humans came from monkeys. He said that people and primates both evolved from a common ancestor. Darwin continued to write and speak about evolution until his death in 1882. He published several more editions of The Origin of Species that expanded on his original theory. Well, it's called the theory of evolution, but a scientific theory isn't just a guess. In science, a theory is an idea that's supported by repeated experimentation and hard evidence. Most scientists today accept an updated version of Darwin's evolutionary theory that includes what we now know about genetics and heredity. Wow, that thing's pretty successful. I fear you have created a monster.
So thanks to Charles Darwin's observant nature, we have a lot of new interesting things to think about as far as science. Okay, back to the notes. Natural selection, a process by which traits that are helpful for survival and reproduction become more common in a population.
Dear Tim
while
and
harmful
Hobie,
traits
how does
become
natural selection
rarer.
work? From Fred D.
Natural selection is
Hey, Fred.
how evolution works.
There are close to 10 million different
idea of
species of
evolution
life
could be
on Earth
seen-
today. Natural selection is an explanation
How
for
did
where
it work?
all of this life
Well,
came
natural
from,
selection is how
and what happened to all of the
works.
species that are no longer
traits
here.
that are helpful
Sure, but
become
first,
more common.
I got to tell you a
than
story.
traits that are not more helpful.
Back in the 1800s,
And what's helpful?
a scientist
Helpful are
named
things that help
Charles
you survive
Darwin
and then
went on a
reproduce and
historic
pass that
expedition
gene,
around the
that
world.
trait on to the next.
While he was in the Galapagos Islands, he noticed something strange
generation.
about the birds. Each of the
Those
islands had
individuals
its
with
own
more
unique species of finch.
advantageous
They
traits
were all very similar
can
to one
reproduce
another,
more
but their
successfully,
beaks were
so
radically
that more
different
individuals in
sizes
the
and
next
shapes.
generation inherit those traits.
On islands with cactus fruits, the finches had longer
that's
beaks,
natural
which helped them
selection.
pick out the seeds.
Pause
On
if you
islands
need
with
to,
lots
get
of
that down.
insects, the
Let's
finches
check
had
out
thin,
natural
sharp
selection.
beaks, and so on. This got Darwin thinking. What if the finches had a common ancestor, some great-great-great-grandparent species that they all shared? As that finch spread out to different islands, it changed to suit its new environment. Well, it was just a hypothesis, a possible explanation for what he was seeing. It took about 20 years of reading, collecting evidence, and experimentation before he was sure of it. By then, he'd developed an idea for how organisms might change over time. In any population of plants or animals, there are variations, random differences. Look at a family of brothers and sisters, and you'll see what I mean. Nobody's exactly the same. Darwin proposed that in nature, certain variations would help organisms survive. Well, surviving in nature is no easy task. Living things are in constant competition for resources. In the nicest environment, there may be a shortage of food, or water, or even space. Plus, you may get eaten. Those are all environmental pressures, stuff that limits a population of living things. This wasn't a new concept, and neither was variation. Darwin's breakthrough was in seeing how the two ideas came together to create change. Okay, imagine a coral reef with some little green fish living near it. There's a big fish that lives there too, and he likes to eat the little fish. As with any population, the green fish have their share of variations. Some differences aren't so good, but others can be seen as favorable. A fish the same color as the reef is harder to spot, so it's less likely to get eaten. It has a better chance of living long enough to reproduce. Now, let's say its variation is something that can be passed on to its offspring. Those that get the new color will have a better chance to reproduce, while the brighter fish succumb to the environmental pressure of being eaten. Over time, the entire population may be the same color as the reef. This system is called natural selection. Darwin also referred to it as survival of the fittest. The fish that match the reef aren't in better shape than the brighter fish. They're fitter in the sense that they're in a better position to survive. These days, biologists don't really use that term because really, natural selection is driven by the death of the least fit. In our example, that'd be those bright fish that the bigger ones are likely to eat. Natural selection is the driving force behind Darwin's theory of evolution. That's the idea that organisms change or evolve over time. There's a huge body of evidence to support evolution, so don't get thrown by that word theory. Scientists use it in a different way than the rest of us. Evolution works really slowly. It can take millions of years for one species to split off from another. But if you're not convinced that organisms can change, just take a look at Sadie here. Sadie's a product of unnatural selection. Humans bred wolves to be more suitable as companions. Some were bred to do hard work, others to be pets. It took about 12,000 years to get from this wolf to this little guy. They aren't separate species just yet, but like I said, evolution is slow. Life on Earth has been evolving for more than 3.5 billion years. Plenty of time to produce the amazing variety of organisms we see today. Pick any two species and go back far enough in time, they'll have a common ancestor, just like Darwin's finches. In his book, On the Origin of Species, Charles Darwin compares the almost endless complexity of life to a massive tree. Some branches don't work out, and they drop off, becoming extinct. Other branches thrive, giving rise to new sub-branches and contributing to the amazing diversity of life. Ah!
For example, if color is important to the species, maybe for blending in or something like that into its background, a parent could have different variations in its offspring caused by mutations or other genetic combinations that could happen naturally. Well, some of those colors aren't going to be advantageous. These are too light colored. They get picked off because they don't blend into their background, whereas these colors fit better and survive and are able to reproduce. As we go through succeeding generations, maybe the lighter and lighter ones are the ones that are easier to be found by predators, for example, leaving only the darker species. So over time, these species become different. They are selected naturally for their environment and they actually fit in better to their environment due to the process of natural selection. So study this picture, see if you can understand the process of natural selection that could go ahead and explain how this population of beetles could change over time. All right, guys, next up is a chance for you to generate your own species. Now, we're doing this much differently than what would happen in nature, but we're going to have you create something new. So in that way, we do have some similarities. Since the beginning of life on Earth, species have managed to change. Since the beginning of life on Earth, species have had special characteristics called adaptations that have allowed them to survive the changes in the environmental conditions around them. Changes in a species' environment include climate change, habitat destruction, or extinction of prey. These things can cause a species to die out unless the species has a characteristic that helps them to survive. For example, a species of bird might have an adaptation for eating sunflower seeds and ants. If the ant population dies out, the bird can still eat seeds and therefore survive. In this activity, you'll explore several adaptations and design an organism with adaptations that you choose. What are adaptations? Well, those are the traits that allow you to survive. So pick an adaptation from the left column. What's your diet going to be? Meat, plants, both? Will you scavenge or will you be a decomposer? Come on, you know you want to be a fun guy? Come on. Pick 2 adaptations from the center column. How do you get around? Flying, hopping, walking, slithering. And then 3 adaptations from column 3, and you can even pick your own. Do you have poison? Secrete terrible stench? I don't know. You could be a flying buffalo fungus for all I care. Because on the back, you get to give yourself a scientific name. Make it sort of Latin. Homo sapien, Canis lupus. Come up with a nickname. What habitat would you live in? What would you eat? How do you get around? What are your special adaptations, and how does that help you? So that is in your packet. It's called the Adaptations A Way of Life sheet. And then make sure you go to Schoology for the credit and play the games, which allow you to do so much of the same activity virtually, and then report back what you've learned in your Schoology account. Well, guys, thanks for trying science and joining us for our Evolution Introduction Day 2. We'll do much more with this as we go on. And again, thanks for trying science. Keep up, stick it up, do the good work, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye for now.